Imagine this. 1944, the Philippines. A battle-hardened Japanese sergeant is in an ambush position in the sweltering, humid jungle. He's heard the stories about the power of the American war machine, of the endless convoys of ships, the steel avalanches of Sherman tanks. But he is ready. His unit knows how to fight them on this terrain. Suddenly, the drone in the sky becomes a deafening roar. It's not just bombers. Hundreds of transport planes break through the clouds, and from their bellies, thousands of paratroopers begin to fall. Standard tactics. But then, something impossible happens. Giant parachute canopies open in the sky, but hanging beneath them are not men, nor supply crates. Beneath them, swaying in the air currents, are 7-ton steel machines. Tanks. The Americans are dropping tanks right out of the sky. This picture is so fantastic, so completely shattering to any concept of warfare, that it seems like fiction. But the idea was absolutely real, and it gave birth to one of the most unique and controversial engineering marvels of the Second World War, the M22 light tank, better known as the Locust. Today we're not just going to tell the story of this incredible weapon, we're going to answer the main question. Did Japanese soldiers ever see this steel rain with their own eyes? The answer will surprise you. This is a story about the dream of giving armor wings, about the brutal reality of engineering compromises, and about how one of the boldest ideas in American tank design found its destiny thousands of miles from the jungles it seemed to be born for. To understand why anyone would even need to drop tanks from the sky, you have to understand the primary weakness of any airborne assault. Paratroopers are the elite, brave, superbly trained soldiers capable of striking at the very heart of enemy territory. But they are light infantry. They jump out of a plane with only the weapons they can carry on their backs. Machine guns, mortars, bazookas, that's all fine. But what do you do when an enemy tank rolls out from behind the trees, or when you need to suppress a well-fortified machine gun bunker? In that moment, paratroopers become desperately vulnerable. They needed their own armor, their own cavalry, that could arrive with them from the heavens. This idea was floating around in every army in the world. The British were experimenting with their Thach tank. The Soviets went even further, strapping wings and a tail to a T-60 tank, creating the insane A-40 flying tank prototype. But it was in America that this concept was taken to mass production. In February of 1941, even before Pearl Harbor, the military laid out the requirements for a new weapon, an airborne light tank. The task seemed almost impossible. The machine had to be light enough to be lifted by an existing or prospective transport aircraft. But at the same time, it needed to have some kind of armor, a cannon, and a crew of 3. This was a world of engineering compromises, where every pound of weight saved meant another millimeter of armor lost or a smaller caliber gun. The giants of American industry took on the challenge: General Motors, Marmon Herrington, and the design bureau of J. Walter Christie, the genius of tank suspensions. The winner of this competition was Marmon Herrington. Their prototype, the T9, was a marvel of compactness. In 1943, it was accepted into service under the official designation M22 light tank, but it earned the nickname Locust among the troops. And it lived up to the name: small, light, and designed to appear suddenly and in large numbers. Let's look under its armor. The Locust weighed just 7.4 tons. For comparison, the main U.S. Army tank, the M4 Sherman, weighed over 30 tons. To achieve such a lightweight, the engineers had to make radical sacrifices. The armor was, frankly, symbolic. The front of the hull and turret were protected by 25 millimeters of steel, set at slight angles. The sides and rear had a thickness of only 12.7 millimeters, half an inch. What did this mean in practice? The Locust's armor could reliably stop rifle-caliber bullets and small shrapnel, but any shell from an anti-tank rifle, let alone a dedicated anti-tank gun, would punch right through it. The 3-man crew, a commander, gunner, a loader, and a driver, was essentially inside a steel box with minimal protection. The heart of the machine was a Lycoming 0435T 6-cylinder boxer engine, an aircraft engine, producing 162 horsepower. It allowed this little guy to reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour on roads, which was a decent figure. But the main highlight of the rumming gear was a modified Christie vertical spring suspension, which provided a smooth ride. The armament was also the result of compromise. The tank was fitted with a 37mm M6 gun, the same one found on the Stuart light tanks. By 1943-44, this was an openly weak weapon. Its armor-piercing shell could handle light armored vehicles or a machine gun nest, but it was almost useless against medium tanks like the German Panzer IV. However, the assumption was that Locusts wouldn't be engaging in duels with enemy tanks. Their job was to support the paratroopers with fire and tracks in places where the enemy had nothing heavier than a machine gun. But the most difficult technical problem wasn't the tank itself, but the method of its delivery. How do you lift a 7-ton machine into the air and bring it down safely? The idea of dropping it on multiple parachutes was too dangerous and inaccurate. The primary delivery method became the glider, a huge, unpowered aircraft that a transport plane would tow to the drop zone and then release for a silent glide to the ground. But this presented a new snag. The standard American Waco CG-4 glider was too small. The Locust simply didn't fit inside. The Americans began to experiment. They tried slinging the tank directly under the fuselage of a C-47 Dakota. To do this, they had to remove the Locust's turret, which was transported inside the plane, and after landing, the crew would have to reinstall it under enemy fire. It was a tactical nightmare. Another option was to use a heavy 4-engine C-54 Skymaster as a tow plane, but even for the Skymaster, the M22 was a serious load. And here, the British enter the scene. They had the same problem, but they also had a solution. The enormous General Aircraft Hamilcar glider. This wooden giant was a true aerial truck, capable of carrying a payload of up to 8 tons. It was as if it were made for the Locust. The American High Command, facing transportation issues and disappointed with the M22's performance, considered it less than successful. But for the British, who were preparing for the invasion of Normandy, any airborne tank was worth its weight in gold. Under the Lend-Lease program, about 260 Locusts were sent to Great Britain, where they entered service with the 6th Airborne Division. And it's here that we get to the answer to our original question. While engineers in the US and tankers in England were trying to teach the Locust how to fly, the war in the Pacific was running its own course. The American command in that theater concluded that the M22 was completely unsuitable for their area of operations. Its thin armor would have been vulnerable even to Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns. Its narrow tracks would have bogged down in the jungles and swamps, and the complex logistics of delivering them by glider across vast ocean expanses was simply unthinkable. For that reason, not a single M22 Locust tank was ever sent to fight against Japan. The scene we painted at the beginning, the Japanese soldier seeing American tanks on parachutes, never actually happened in reality. It's a powerful image, a military myth, born from the sheer audacity of the idea. But the Locust story doesn't end there, because it did see combat, and its baptism by fire became one of the most dramatic and chaotic episodes of the last major airborne operation in Europe. March 1945. The Allied armies stand on the west bank of the Rhine River, the last natural barrier on the way into the heart of Germany. To force the river, they planned Operation Varsity, a massive airborne assault involving the American 17th and British 6th Airborne Divisions. And as part of the British force, 8 M22 Locust tanks were preparing for their first and final battle. On March 24, 1945, hundreds of planes and gliders took to the air. Inside the giant Hamilcars, swaying in the turbulence, sat the Locust crews. Their mission was simple: land, drive out of the glider, and immediately provide support to the paratroopers clearing the bridgehead. But everything went wrong from the very beginning. The sky over the landing zone was filled with the smoke and fire of German anti-aircraft guns. The gliders, massive and clumsy wooden targets, suffered heavy losses. One Hamilcar with a Locust aboard was hit in mid-air and crashed to the ground, burying both the tank and its crew under the wreckage. Another glider cast off from its tow plane too early, and its tank ended up several miles from its objective. Those who were lucky enough to make it through faced chaos on the ground. One of the Locusts drove out of its glider and immediately fell into a shell crater, getting stuck. Another was knocked out by fire from a German self-propelled gun almost immediately after landing. Radio communication was down. The crews were left to fend for themselves in a hell of fire and explosions. But some broke through. One Locust managed to support American paratroopers who were pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. Its 37mm gun, useless against tanks, turned out to be the perfect tool for suppressing enemy strongpoints. Another tank, moving with British infantry, took on German snipers and helped clear several houses. For a few hours, these tiny machines did what they were created for. They were the only armor on the beachhead, inspiring confidence in their own troops and fear in an enemy who never expected to see tanks appear out of thin air. By the end of the day, Operation Varsity was a success. The bridgehead was secured. But for the Locust, this was the end. The experience of its deployment showed that the idea was correct, but this specific execution was a failure. The tank was too weakly protected, too weakly armed, and too difficult to deliver. After the war, the remaining M22s were quickly decommissioned. So, was this story a failure? From the perspective of the machine, yes. But from the perspective of the idea, no. The Locust was a bold experiment, a necessary mistake on the path of military development. It proved that airborne forces needed armor and forced engineers to find new, more perfect solutions. The experience gained with the M22 directly led to the creation of post-war airborne tanks like the M551 Sheridan, which was actually dropped on a parachute platform in Vietnam. So while the Japanese soldier never saw that steel rain over the jungle, the dream of tanks with wings was absolutely real. It was a dream forged in metal, tested in battle, and paid for in blood. The story of the Locust is a reminder that victory in war is won not only by the strongest, but also by the boldest ideas, and that sometimes, to take a step into the future, you first have to take a desperate leap from the sky.